right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD, anxiety, and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Fasan. I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. Thank you all so much for joining me today for what is typically a question and answer based podcast. If you have a question for the podcast that you would like me or myself and a guest to talk about, to answer, to pontificate on, you can go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can send me a message over there. You can also send me an audio question. You can email it to me at questions@fearcastpodcast.com. You can click on the submit a question link and just send me the link to like a shared Google Drive with your audio in there. Or you can go over to Instagram and you can send me a DM over there by recording your voice. I'm Fearcast Podcast over at Instagram. I actually have gotten a couple audio questions in the past week or so. So those should be showing up soon. So thank you all for sending those out. So for today, I have a guest on, and I thought this would be a really good episode to put out at this time of year. So around this time of year, for those who are in that world, kids are going back to school. And with the transition from summer break onto school, it can ramp up anxiety, can provide a whole list of new triggers or a whole list of new situations that either the kiddo is not prepared for, or is struggling with, or just is having trouble adapting to in some sort of way. So we thought this would be a really good episode to put up to talk about anxieties related to kids. And this is going to be, anywhere from, kindergarten up to, even college. So it's going to be folks who, obviously going to school. And I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll rope in my good friend Elena Fasan to chat about this. She's been a guest on the podcast before to talk about kids and parenting and anxiety and OCD. So I thought she would be a great addition to chat about this. So let me tell you a little bit about Elena, and then we'll get on to this conversation. So Elena Fasan is the founder and director of the Children's OCD and Anxiety Collective based in California. She specializes in the treatment of OCD and related disorders in children and adolescents using mindfulness-based CBT and exposure and response prevention and ACT. Elena received training while working as a therapist at UCLA's Child and Adolescent OCD Intensive Outpatient Treatment Program and then the OCD Center of Los Angeles. She is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Development at Cal State University in Northridge. Elena has a particular interest in how OCD affects family systems and in educating parents about OCD. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Elena Fasan. All right, Elena Fasan, thank you so much for joining me for the Fearcast.
Hi, Kevin Foss. It's really nice to join you.
Thank you so much for taking your time to chat with me and us, the collective us, all the people whose ears are connected to some type of headphone, to talk about kids, teens, adolescents, and parents, and anxiety, OCD, and all of that combined in going back to school, or just anxiety issues that kids, teens, and adolescents are facing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think just to jump right in,
Let's do it.
What I would say is that, going back to school, even if you're a kid, teen, emerging adult who enjoys school and is looking forward to it, it's still a major change and transition after summer vacation. And people with OCD, anxiety disorders, OC spectrum disorders tend to struggle with changes and transitions, even if they are positive ones. So I think that this time of year, those of us in the field who work with kids, teens, emerging adults, we see a spike in our referrals and in people calling us because their kids are, becoming more symptomatic as they head back to school.
Yeah. I'm certainly noticing that as well. I think this time of year, We do get a lot more calls about people looking to get their kid back in school. I think there's kind of a combination of things. Yes, the stressors of school, the stressors of, that transition time, and also, kids coming off a summer break, not having perhaps the support, perhaps having conversations about mental health, having the consistency of therapy. The old joke about during during August, all therapists go away.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, well, for those who have seen What About Bob, that will make more. That will have more. Yes. I don't know, saliency to you. For all the younger kids, that was a movie that was made before everyone was born. Anyways, but not having that support, not having those conversations, then having that, as you said, this huge transition back to consistency and waking up every day and obligation and of social stressors. I guess, why don't we start off with maybe some of the stressors that kids and teens are facing as they're going back to school, and how that can influence, or what you're seeing with the kids and teens that you're working with in going back to school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think part of that change transition thing, again, regardless if it's a positive one or something they're excited about or looking forward to, is I think that brains that are more prone to anxiety or more prone to low distress tolerance read changes and transitions as dangerous. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. I think one of the things that I think is particularly difficult for adolescents going back to school, and again, even more so with anxious adolescents and or adolescents with OCD, is that they have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. Their melatonin drops over the course of adolescence 2 hours later. So it's much harder for them to get up early and to go to bed early. And that gets compounded by devices. Mm-hmm. So I think that with the teenagers, there's that added impact that, on top of a change in transition back to school being difficult, lack of sleep can also spike symptoms. The other thing that I see with a lot of my teenage clients is an incredible amount of outside pressure being placed on them about college. And, it really starts before junior year. I have clients who are freshmen who the conversations are already being had with them. And it just feels like they have a lot of pressure placed on them. A lot of kids and teens and emerging adults with OCD and or anxiety can be perfectionistic. And so that's part of it too, is them dreading having to work so hard. When you kind of remove some of the perfectionism, they do tend to get the same grades. But I call it academic OCD. And I think, though, it's also just, they've got this internal pressure to perform really well. They've got this external pressure. Unless you get straight A's, unless you do all these extracurriculars, you are going to not be able to get into a good college. They get that from their parents. They get that from their school. They get that from society. And, I just think that if you're prone to anxiety, being thrown back into school with kids you may not be friends with, and they're sitting next to you. So there's that social pressure that you mentioned as well. So it's just a lot. It's just a lot for them to manage, and a lot for parents to manage, frankly.
Yeah, it's a ton. And I've even heard kids as into junior high being having that conversation about college, about prepping for college, and about being in that mindset for it. And I can certainly see how for some kids, it would lead into that idea of perfectionism, and especially if they're already kind of predisposed to perfectionistic mindset and that idea of
Right.
I need to do it right.
Yes. And what I will hear sometimes from my clients who are junior high or middle school, however you say it. I grew up with junior high, but I think here in California, a lot of people say middle school. That, you know,
the podcast goes anywhere the internet goes. So it goes all over the world.
So middle school, junior high, tween years.
Whatever you call it.
Whatever it is.
Province.
I'm sure that you have heard this before with younger clients is, I'm so anxious. I did terrible on that test.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I say, what do you mean you did terrible? What's their answer usually? What grade are they going to say that they did terrible with?
A minus,
do you have any
B
guesses?
plus.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I got a 93.
Mm-hmm.
I got a 95.
Mm-hmm.
And they're viewing that as terrible.
Terrible.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of conversations with parents of young people who are very concerned about them getting into college and they've got to do well in school because they're not going to get into a good college. And meanwhile, they're not functioning well, the kid or the teen, because their OCD and or anxiety symptoms are so bad. And what I always say is, you know, it doesn't matter where they go to school if they are struggling with their mental health. Like, we have to get their mental health managed before we worry about school. So
I'm already hearing a parent who might be hearing that and saying,
yes, please.
Yeah, but Elena, you don't get it. If they go to and then fill in the blank with what you think is a subpar school, if they go there, they're not going to have the same opportunities as someone who goes to and then fill in the blank with what you think is a high tier school. So in other words, trying to justify the necessity of it, and I think that can amplify it, right? Hearing from your parents, it's important and necessary, and I, as the parent, will be pleased with your performance.
I think you just hit the nail on the head in one sense, which is how often is that about the bragging rights? Mm-hmm. I don't think it always is. Mm-hmm. Probably it's just the minority. Mm-hmm. But there are certain schools that bring prestige with them, right? I think my response to that would be, I think we overvalue as a society the importance of an Ivy League education. I'm just going to use that as, you know, the bar, right? I grew up in a family of people who went to the University of Chicago, which is an excellent school. There's schools outside of the Ivy League that are excellent schools. But my personal experience as someone who struggled with OCD from early onset through emerging adulthood was I was a very serious ballet dancer. And I dropped out of school to join a ballet company. And I got my GED. And because I went back to school in my 30s, I went to a community college because it was more affordable for my general ed. And then I transferred to Cal State. And first of all, no one's ever asked me where I went to school. And second of all, I got a great education and I met great people there. And I don't have insane school loans. When I hear about what some of these elite universities are charging for tuition alone, I mean, Northwestern is $90,000. NYU is similar. I know a kid who went to NYU, and I think at the time tuition was, I think, $78,000. So, listen, I am not saying that education is not important, right? I have a master's degree. My parents were both college professors. So I am not saying that it's unimportant to get a college degree. I'm just saying that I think we're putting too much pressure on kids and teens to, go to schools that perhaps sometimes you should go to this school based on its name and maybe not as much based on what that kid is interested in doing. I think that can happen. And for anxious kids and perfectionistic kids and kids with OCD, I just watch, I've watched this every year around application time, around acceptance time, just a lot of anxiety. And kids who are starting their junior year right now have been given the message since middle school that junior year is the hardest year and junior year is the most important year. Right. So they go into, and I'm sure this is true for kids who don't have a predisposition to OCD and or anxiety as well. They go into the junior year already with this pressure and this stress, right? So I think that can really impact their experience of school. And I think it can also impact their experience of getting rejected from some of these schools. Now, I do think that, it's harder to get into some of those schools. I have a family member who went to Amherst and he says, I don't think I would get in now, So I do think there is, it's harder than it used to be. But I'm just going to go back to the idea of health. So for parents who are saying, yes, but it's really important, what school they go to, it may be, it may be based on what they want to do and what what kind of programs they have there. Like, there might be a small state school that has an incredible, anthropology department, and that's what they want to study, right? So I think it's more about, supporting kids at this time and supporting kids in their anxiety. And if we focus on supporting them, making sure that they are well in terms of their mental health, as we do with their physical health, right? Then they're more likely to be successful at college. If we do the opposite and we focus on, what's most important is that you get incredible grades and you do all these extracurriculars and then they go off to college and they don't have scaffolding of support. They don't have a foundation, right? Then they might fall apart at college. So that's kind of in a very long roundabout way what I would say to parents who might have heard me say that and said, but wait a minute. We want them to be successful, whatever school they go to. And I'm not saying that expensive Ivy League schools or elite schools can't offer a good education. I'm just saying that those are not the only opportunity for a good education. And that there are certainly people who go to those schools who did not have a good experience.
So kind of the college and success at all costs. Right. And I there probably are some fields where those types of schools, are really important. I think if you're going into high finance, it might be something like that. I'm not positive, but, and I am biased because of my own experience, but I was a National Merit Scholar and I dropped out of school to join a ballet company, and the education I got doing that was incredible. Now, I am certainly not advocating for dropping out of school. That is not what I'm saying. That was because that's I think exactly what I'm going to call this episode. Elena recommends you drop out of college.
Yes. No, out of high school. I dropped out of high school.
Oh, excuse me, high school. Brought to you by the Faircast.
Yes. Yeah, that is not what I'm advocating for at all.
Right.
You know.
Right. What I'm hearing is, in a sense, is trying to find a balance between these two sides, and being more focused on what is the interest that you have and how do we guide you towards that, as opposed to just this broad, it's got to be success and it's got to be a certain grade. Yeah, yes. It's got to be that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I totally agree with that. And I guess we could even extend that to certain private schools, right? For younger kids. Mm-hmm. You know, there's I saw it as a nanny when kids were in 6th grade and they're applying to private middle schools, or kids who are applying to private high schools, and just a lot of pressure, and, you know, getting tutors to help them with the application process. I guess they're not really tutors. I guess they would be more coaches.
Coaches, probably.
But just even that is like the pressure starts there, you know? So with younger kids, I think even we want to be mindful of, you know, having certain expectations, right? That they work hard and do their best, but not having pressure put on them that you have to get straight A's, or, you know, you're going to fail. And I think in particular for kids with anxiety and OCD, mm-hmm. in my experience, they're already putting that pressure on themselves, mm-hmm. right? My parents would say to me, mm-hmm. you don't need to take all honors classes. Why are you taking honors chemistry? You don't even like chemistry. And I felt a lot of internal pressure to get straight A's, to take all honors classes. And it was a lot, you know, it burned me out. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of late nights. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's necessary.
What I sometimes hear from clients who have this, you know, in this sort of world, and where perfectionism and college, et cetera, is a big deal, there's this kind of association that may be intentional, but maybe unintentional, where their academic performance is tied to parental affection. That if yes. they do well, their parents, it's perceived as if their parents now love them more or now love them, whereas if they don't perform well, their parents are upset with them as people, not just, right. you know, hey, it's a disappointment, it's frustrating that you got a C or a D or whatever it might be, but it can be internalized as, I'm not doing it right, I'm not good enough until I get this grade, and then I will get this attention, affection.
Right. Yes. I totally agree with that. And I think an antidote to that is, well, let me back up. I think one of the things that's really, really powerful and that research supports is modeling, even for teenagers, being the most powerful form of learning. Mm-hmm. So in the example I gave, my parents were saying to me, mm-hmm. right, it's okay if you are not, you know, getting straight A's. You don't have to take all honors classes. At the same time that they were modeling very high achievement. Mm-hmm. My mom was working on her PhD when I was a young child, mm-hmm. right? My dad was a law professor. He mm-hmm. had been a Fulbright scholar at the London School of Economics. Mm-hmm. Everyone in their life, not everyone, that's exaggerating. Most of their social circle were also academics, high achieving people.
Fancy smarties, I think is what we call them.
What do we call them?
Fancy smarties.
Oh, fancy smarties?
I think that's what they're. I
think the clinical term is smarty pants.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Maybe we could blend those together. Fancy smarty pantsy.
That works.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
So I think the reason I say that is for parents to know that words are powerful and what you say is powerful. Mm-hmm. And so is modeling. So if you are modeling perfectionism, right? Or you are modeling, how important I went, say a parent, I went to Stanford, and from, the time their baby is born, they're putting them in Stanford onesies, and they are, really, really pushing that idea of Stanford, or, and then, they arrange a college tour of Stanford when their kid is a sophomore, right? That is modeling to them that if you don't get into Stanford, it's not okay.
These are my expectations.
Right. I have these expectations of you to go where I went to school.
Right. And as someone who went to UC Davis for undergrad, I think the idea of sending someone to Stanford is a terrible idea, first off. So the parent is wrong on a number of levels, but also to send that message and expectation that this is the thing that you've got to do. I think, on the idea of, to kind of piggyback off that with, parents setting the example about how to kind of deal with it, how to live life and how to be flexible with things, as is kind of modeling that idea of disappointment or of failure, that are parents modeling, when things don't work out well or things don't work out as they expected or desired, are they handling it in failure? Are they handling it as like it's the world is crumbling?
Right.
I am now bad, or are they handling it as this is really frustrating to me, but I can be flexible. I can try again next time. It's not the end of the world, and we're going to be able to get through it somehow.
Yes.
Somehow.
And it's an opportunity to learn as well, right? So you might need to help me with this. It's actually on my fridge, but it's the Samuel Beckett quote: ever tried, ever failed. Try again, fail better.
Sounds good to me.
I could be a little bit off, but it's this idea of like, it's okay to fail and continue to fail and to fail better. And also, what's our definition of failure, right? But I agree with that. If you're modeling, beating yourself up, shaming yourself, then your kids are going to pick up on that. And I also think that sometimes parents, becoming a parent doesn't mean that you have an understanding of child development, right?
Confirm.
Right. You are confirming.
I'm confirming that as a parent of two feral children.
Right. So, parents may underestimate what their kids and teens are picking up on. They're picking up on all of it.
We will, my wife and I, we will constantly say, we sometimes refer to our oldest child as Roz. And if anybody's ever seen Monsters, Inc., Roz is a giant slug who is always listening, and our child is always listening from across the room when my wife and I are talking in regular, just indoor volumes.
Right.
We'll say something, and from the opposite side of the room, we'll hear, "What's catastrophic mean?" And we're like, "Wait, what?" She heard that. So now we have to explain, and it wouldn't be catastrophic, it'd be something very likely inappropriate. But it's something that she heard that we didn't even know that she could hear. So
exactly,
always listening, and they're always internalizing. So the way that we're talking about our successes, the way we're talking about our kids, is also having an effect. So all of that can be in play. If I could take a slight shift,
please.
You talked at the very beginning about how kids and adolescents, teens, etc., with OCD or OCD and anxiety can have a hard time with transition.
Yes.
what recommendations would you give either to a kid coming into your office, and I'm using kid broadly, kid coming into your office, or a parent who's concerned about their kid? What recommendations would you make to help with this transition? I know you referenced kind of sleep is important. What other things should parents and teens and kids be thinking about to help in that transition process? Because I know that, I mean, my oldest just started school and she's on her third day, and she likes it. We'll see. But, kids are starting to roll into school in the next couple of weeks. How can some parents start to get their heads around, and kids get their heads around that transition?
Okay, so great question. And I have several suggestions. So I like to use the idea of contingency planning. Prepare yourself, right? Like, if you were to go camping, would you just go camping without looking at the weather report for the time you're going to be there, without, checking out what's going on at the campsite? What do they have at the campsite? Where are the nearest showers? What's the wildlife like? Or would you just be like, let's just throw our tents in a car and go? No, you do some contingency planning, right? So I think that preparing yourself and your kids is the first step. And what that means is thinking of the different contingencies. So my kid has been, relaxing and playing, hanging out with friends, doing whatever, vacationing with us all summer. Now they're going to be asked to sit still in a chair for most of the day. Maybe not your kid's age. That's probably less so. But they're going to be asked to pay attention. They're going to be asked to do things on a particular schedule, including going to the bathroom, right? Not to say that you can't raise your hand and go to the bathroom, but I know for me, an anxious OCD kid, like, I would have never done that, like, because I would be too, like, this goes against the rules. I can't raise my hand right now, right? So contingency planning, and that might mean, being prepared that your kid might be exhausted, might melt down more. Kids with OCD tend to keep it at bay while at school and then fall apart when they get home. That's fairly typical. Contingency planning might be, they're going to a new school. Can we reach out to the school and see if they could give us a tour so that they're ready for it? It could be, we're going to rehearse. And what I mean by rehearse is, we're going to get in the car and see how long it takes us to get there in normal morning traffic. We're going to rehearse you packing your lunch for yourself the night before. We're going to prep you so that you're ready for it. If your kid needs accommodations, which, it doesn't necessarily have to be an IEP. They might need simply the teacher to know that they have OCD or anxiety. And maybe there's I have a lot of kids who the teachers have been given a signal, right? Where the teacher will just walk by the desk and tap on the desk. And that's a reminder, use your tools, right? The kid might have, inside the binder or, one of their books, little cards that, has reminders of what tools they can use. I think that if they are in therapy, working with the therapist to come up with a plan. So really preparing yourself as, a family, honestly, for the effect of this big transition. And I mean, I think that could be useful for even, kids who don't have anxiety and or OCD.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think within that as well, with that kind of planning, then we can also anticipate that there will likely be an increase in compulsive behavior, right? Especially as you talked about, like, as they go to school, they kind of hold it all together, and then they can erupt when they come home. Now, this isn't every kid, and if your kid doesn't,
No.
it doesn't mean that it's, anything bad or wrong. But when they come home, there might be this expectation that their compulsions might be a little bit higher, or the urge to do it might be a little bit higher. So either having that conversation and expectation that it's going to happen, so it's not, oh my gosh, why are you doing this? And this is terrible. And we got to call Dr. So-and-so and, all that.
Right.
Or to be surprised about it and think that school is breaking them.
Right.
Or shaming them to say, oh my gosh, I'm going back to school and I'm so much worse. And in that internalized narrative that I'm now bad. Having that expectation that, when things are different, your routines, your strategies, and the predictability of life, all of that helps to, we're creatures of habit. We like the predictability. So when things aren't there, we now have to go into overdrive and start, thinking harder, working harder to figure it all out. And that over time starts to tighten back up. And we get to this place where then we can anticipate what that year is going to be like, or that school, thing is going to be like.
Right. And then you're also ready for when they come back from the holiday break, or when they come back from spring break, right? Same thing. And it may never happen, but at least you're ready if it does. And also, in my experience with clients, when you make the plan, the making of the plan itself can sometimes be enough to kind of reduce the potential for, the meltdown or the difficulty. When you were saying that, I was thinking in my head, just a nameless, faceless parent saying, but you were doing so great all summer. What happened? Right.
Yeah.
And then the kid going, I'm bad, I'm wrong. Right. Instead of just, the opposite of that would be, you're having a hard time. It makes sense. Right? This is very different from the summer.
And that parental response is very different, right? That parental response takes the increased anxiety, takes the increase in obsessional thinking and the urge for compulsion, and it wraps around that and says, this is all okay. This isn't weird or bad or wrong or, completely alien to us. We know this, and I'm doing like a wraparound motion. No one can see this except for Elena, and it says you're okay, and I'm here with you.
Right,
and it
normalizes.
Yeah,
and even I think another way to normalize it is, parents kind of owning their own experiences. So what we were harkening back to harkening. I think I just made a word up.
I think it's harkening, but it makes me think of Christmas, the hark the herald.
Oh yeah, hark the heralding.
I want winter. I want it so bad. All right, sorry, go ahead. Harkening back to the thing that we talked about earlier.
Harkening back to the thing that we talked about earlier of modeling is, I think that it can be really powerful for parents to modeling, but also kids hearing everything and listening, right? Is making a point of saying, we're done with vacation. The parents go back to school, the parents go back to work after being on a summer vacation with their kids for a week or two. And then the parents coming home from work that night and saying at the dinner table, wow, that was a rough transition. I felt really out of my element. I felt like I wasn't doing a good job. That was hard. It was hard for me to get up this morning. It was, I felt kind of out of sorts. I was irritable, whatever it is. So that their kids are now thinking, oh yeah, so it's normal. It's normal to struggle with transitions, because if we go back to that perfectionism, we don't want kids beating themselves up for what's a normative experience for transitions to be difficult, right? And so if we can kind of own our own difficulties with some of these similar experiences, then it does make it easier for them.
Right. And that's, again, yes, owning that for ourselves as parents and kind of saying all this is okay. I think there's also that a great teaching moment. As you were talking about that, what was coming up in my brain was kind of role playing through a sticky situation or a tough situation. And like, if something funky happens at school and, anxiety was high, or there was a really, perhaps a tense moment amongst peers, or a perceived failure, and a kid comes home and they're having a hard time with it. Talking about, yes, what happened, and you can even like reenact that, kind of play that out. So like, let's one, show me how it worked. Who am I going to be? Who are you going to be? And playing that out, and then saying, all right, we played that out, and oh, how terrible it must have felt. Let's do it differently, but let's do something. How about you respond differently this time, and I'll be your teacher, and I'll say this time. And it's right. or something to that effect, where you get to play out that situation again, and you get to practice that different coping skill, that different reaction. And that can be both parents who maybe, maybe they are going to say, man, you know what? This is a whole different situation. Maybe I didn't handle your tough day well, and I made you feel bad. Can I practice that again with you? Or, love it. And then flipping that around. Kid had a hard day at school. Parent can be the teacher, and they can be that supportive person. Right. And the student, the kid, whoever, is going to practice that new skill and practice it a bunch of different ways. And it's part of that rehearsal practice makes better, right? So here's a coping skill that you can do. And also for the parents, if you mess things up, and I'm pointing it to myself here because I'm going to mess it up. I promise myself and my kid that I'm going to mess it up.
Of course.
Own it and apologize to your kid of saying, hey, I messed up here. I didn't do this right, and I can do better. And what can I do to help make this right? Send the message to your kid that even parents mess up. So when you do, 100%. You can improve. And that can, go ahead.
It's huge. And as you're saying it, what's as important, if not more important than apology, is repair.
Yes.
Repairing the relationship. So it's not just about, I was wrong, I was sorry. It's also, is there anything that I can do to make this better? Mm-hmm. Is it, this is how I intend to approach this moving forward. Mm-hmm. I can't promise you that I will be perfect. I can't promise you that I won't mess up again. I will mess up again. But working to repair the damage done, and kids are generally going to be very open to that and forgiving. And, I think it's really important for parents to model imperfection and to also, acknowledge when I could have handled that differently.
Yeah, I think it puts it. We talked earlier about Kristen Neff and about her big thing is self-compassion. Yeah. And there are the components to that, and now that I'm bringing it up, I'm totally going to mess it up, even though there are 3 components to it. I'm doing it already. Kindness, common humanity, and what's the third one?
Mindfulness.
There you go. And in that, we're kind of practicing that. We're saying, we are going to mess up, right? That common humanity is all of us are in this together. And we, you, me, kid, parent, can try to do something different next time. We're not going to beat ourselves up about it. We're not going to shame ourselves and other ourselves.
Right.
We're going to say, yeah, you messed up. The phrase we use with our kids all the time is, you're a good kid who makes mistakes.
Yes, I love that. And by the way, listeners, you didn't miss anything. We were talking about this before we started recording. We were talking about Kristen Neff and self-compassion. I think also, right, the mindfulness piece of that. Mm-hmm. So being here now in the present moment with awareness and non-judgment means once the apology and the repair has been made, we're not going to keep going back to it. You always do this, or you did, relitigating it, bringing it back up. Part of mindfulness is like, we're here now. That happened. I acknowledged it. And now we're here and we're going to move forward.
Right.
I also think, I love that you brought that up, because I also think that it can be really powerful, not just modeling and acknowledging mistakes, but also modeling self-compassion, right? I made a mistake and I'm human and lots of people make mistakes, and I'm going to be kind to myself in this moment that I made a mistake. Right? I'm not only going to be kind to my child, but I'm also going to be kind to myself.
Right.
Something else that occurs to me too is enlisting supporters, right? So I think that, you know, unfortunately, it's not like when we were growing up where you had a school counselor. At least when I was growing up, there was a school counselor who was always there and was just at one school. That isn't always the case now, but if there's a school counselor or a trusted teacher or even somebody who works in the office, like having a point person, right? People who work in the school system are working in the school system because they want to help children and teens. Hopefully, we hope.
We hope.
Right?
We hope.
So, you know, I think that enlisting a supporter. Now, we want to also be respectful of, you know, it doesn't, to me, every person has a right to self-determination. So I think it's really important that if you are going to enlist supporters, that you first ask your child or teen, is it okay that we reveal to this person that you have these struggles and that could be someone you could go to, right? Or, you know, I get a lot of kids who are, you know, they have their cell phones in school and they perhaps have social anxiety, right? Social anxiety is, you know, kids and teens and emerging adults with social anxiety, as they go back to school, they're going to be triggered, right? That might feel overwhelming for them. So that's an example of, you know, they're going into the bathroom with their cell phone and they're like, I'm freaking out. I'm so anxious. Come pick me up. Right. And the parent's response can be, we have the plan in place. I know you can handle this. Use the plan. If you don't have that plan in place, right, then you might go, oh my gosh, I have to go rescue my kid. Now, let's remember that a lot of kids who are anxious and or have OCD have parents who are anxious and or have OCD, right? And they're hardwired to try to rescue their kids from danger or perceived danger. And kids are hardwired to seek that rescuing, whether it's perceived or actual danger. So I think that parents who are also anxious, which is totally understandable when your kid is anxious to experience your own anxiety and distress, even if you're not prone to it, is to step back for a moment and remind yourself they're not in danger, they're anxious. And asking them to sit with their anxiety is what is going to build distress tolerance, is what is going to build flexibility. Rescuing them from perceived danger will teach them that they can't tolerate it. Now, I mean, I'm not being black and white, so there may be circumstances where they're completely flooded with anxiety and they're melting down, and it's going to affect, you know, how people at the school view them. You know, it's not black and white. I always say to my clients' parents, I'm the expert on OCD and anxiety, but you're the expert on your child. So it's not going to be one size fits all.
Right. And but what we're talking about are general principles guiding treatment and guiding ways to overcome OCD and anxiety. These aren't, one size fits all for every single person. Unfortunately, with a podcast, we can't take into account every single person, every single kid's perspective. And so your results may vary. Go talk to your therapist about that. And if you have questions, I've said this before, if you have questions about this and you think, you heard something from a ridiculous podcaster, and you have questions about it, go talk to your therapist about it. Hey, I heard some schmuck on the internet talk about this. What do you think about that? And they might have a very good reason why you should completely ignore our advice here. But
Yes.
they might also say, what do you think about that? That might be a really good idea. So
Right.
have that conversation. I know that we've got, I know we have a hard out. I know we're butting up against that time. I wanted to first ask, where can people get more information about you and stuff that you've got going on? And what would be some kind of final advice or takeaway that either parents or teens can have in their back pocket during this time?
Okay. So I am the founder and director of the Children's OCD and Anxiety Collective. I am located in Los Angeles, but I treat clients in California, Florida, Arizona, and internationally, except in Canada, and with some limited days per year in Wyoming and Colorado. I also recently launched an online resource center for parents and others supporting young people with OCD, anxiety, and related disorders. That's called Parenting OCD. So that would be parentingocd.com. If you Google the Children's OCD and Anxiety Collective and you have questions for me, or if you go to Parenting OCD and you have questions for me that came up during this podcast or otherwise, you can fill out a contact form and reach out to me. I'm more than happy to respond. My Instagram is parenting_OCD. And I guess my final thoughts and takeaway would be educate yourself if you're a parent about OCD, anxiety related disorders. If you are a kid and teen, educate yourself about it. That's always the first step. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's really helpful, that shared humanity piece we were talking about. I think it's really helpful. Sometimes when you're a young person and it's all you know, I think this was my experience, you can feel very alone. Mm-hmm. Like nobody understands this. Nobody has this experience. So trying to find peer support, the IOCDF might be a good resource for that. One of the ways that I approach that with clients is I ask them how many kids go to your school, or I ask their parents, and then I say, bare minimum, based on what we know from research, this many kids at your school have OCD. Mm-hmm. Or I will even say, a kid or a teen might say, I've never met anyone with OCD. And I will say, yes, you have. You just maybe didn't know it. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think educating yourself about it, modeling, getting mm-hmm. support from others, finding them support, whether that's through therapy or peer support. There's just a lot of resources out there now that they can take advantage of. There's so much more out there than there was when I was a kid, for sure.
Information.
Yeah, for sure. There's an incredible online OCD camp if your kid has or teen has OCD that is, I believe, in February every year, hosted by the IOCDF, which is the International OCD Foundation. And just, you're going to have hard days. And that's if your kids have OCD, anxiety, or a related disorder or not. Mm-hmm. And so it's just remembering that, our former boss, you're going to recognize this. Mm-hmm. He used to always say, don't attach too much to the good because it will pass. And don't attach too much to the bad because it will pass.
I think that would be a good place to leave it here. So, Elena Fasan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, Kevin.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at Fearcast Podcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.